Yeah, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to our Security Plus session. And for today's sessions, we have the managing identity and access, and we have four topics to discuss. The first one is about implementing identity and access management. The second one is about configure Active Directory services. And the third one is configure access services. Then finally, manage accounts. So this is actually our lesson for our seventh session. This is our session number 7. Yeah, so we are almost done with the complete lesson. I remember that we still have about 3 to 4 lessons. Yeah, so hopefully within this week we can finish the entire lesson. Okay. So let's talk about identity and access management. Yeah, this is a security process that provides identity and authentication and authorization mechanism for the entities to work with the organizational assets. So imagine this: before you allow if you're the employer, maybe before you allow your employee or employees to access any of the organizational assets, you will need to provide them with the identity, the authentication, and authorization mechanism. So you can define attributes in the identity such as the purpose, the function, the clearance, etc. Attributes could be used to enable access system to make decisions for authentication and authorization. Example, employee roles factor into identity or identity, like department and managerial status. Yeah. And IAM, or identity and access management, is a crucial process for the overall IT system. So you might need to communicate with your HR department to provide the access for the required employees. Yeah. So normally we discuss this. The IT will need to talk to the HR, vice versa. Now there are several access control models. Yeah. Starting with the MAC, yeah, known as the mandatory access control, which compares subject's security designation with subject clearance level. So think about a confidential or top secret, top secret system, which only allows the access based on the subject's clearance level, which is actually subject here represent the user, as well as the object security designation. For example, that the object is the file or a specific document. Yeah. So clearance level must meet or exceed designation to gain access. And normally each of the asset will have what they call a security label, and usually changed by the administrator only. So imagine if that is, let's say you need to access a top secret file or document while you yourself only has a clearance level of, let's say, confidential or secret. So you will not be able to access the top secret document which has security label of, let's say, top secret, while you yourself has the clearance level up to the secret. Yeah. So the clearance level, remember that in MAC, or mandatory access control, clearance level must meet or exceed designation to gain access. Yeah. And normally MAC is being used in many organizations. I mean, none, I would say, non-industrial organizations such as military. Okay. And then the second one is DAC. DAC is known as the access control object through ACL. DAC stands for discretionary access control. Yeah. So access the object is controlled through the ACL or access control list. Think about your Windows. Yeah. When you create your Windows, and as the owner of the document, the owner can place subject on ACL, while the owner can also modify the ACL to provide access to the object, yeah, or the document for other subject or users. Okay, so the easiest example of this DAX system or access control model is the DAC access control model. The example is Windows, yeah, which allows the owner of the object to control the access to or for other users through a access control list. Yeah, I'll be giving you some examples of this. Yeah, and then we have the RBAC. Also known as the role-based access control, which is a predefined roles that allows the object to be accessed by users in a specific role. So subject here assign predefined roles, like for example, programmers, administrators, or maybe systems administrators, or maybe something like VPN users would be the examples of roles, and subject must be in certain role to access object, and roles assigned to subject based on policies. Yeah. And then the fourth one is the rule-based access control based on the operational rules or restriction. Restricting access based on time of day is also an example. Rules set examined before subject is given access to the object. One of the example is the role-based access control that controls the firewall, or maybe intrusion detection system, or even your VPN server, yeah, or remote access server. And then we also have something called ABAC, yeah, attribute-based access control based on a set of attributes the subject possesses. Yeah, so for example, it follows the if X, then Y procedure. Example, if the subject has all required attributes, then grant access. And then attributes are created ahead of time and assigned as needed. Yeah. Okay, let me give you an example of this one. Okay, so let's say, let me give you my screen. Yeah, this is my screen. So let's say I will create a folder. We just call it as semi, yeah. And here, I will just double click semi, the folder semi. And then from there, I will create a new file. We just call it as test file. And I'll put something there. I'll just put, this is a test file. Okay, I'll save it. Okay. Now let's have a look at the properties of this file as well as the folder. Right click the test file, go to the properties, and then here, yep. Yeah, here, yeah, just right click and properties. And here you can see that we have the property of the file. It shows that the test file is 20 bytes, and then you can go to the security, and by default, we have the groups or usernames, authenticated user, systems, administrators, and user. Yeah. You can easily edit this permission, yeah, to include you yourself as the primary user, yeah, by clicking edit, and then you can add yourself. For example, here, Sami Yulianto. I'll do the checking, yeah, and notice that I have successfully added myself as the user within this group or usernames. And by default, I can select, okay, full control for myself, right? Since I am the admin, right? And by default, as you can see that after I have added my semi, which is my usernames, I was able to actually include me, myself, as the user that has access. Specifically this one, I have access, full control, modify, read and execute, read, write. And you can easily go to the advanced setting to look at the advanced security settings. Yeah, by default here, I have already added, and it says that my access control is not inherited from anyone. Yeah, and as the user, yeah, I can, yeah, because I have a full access to this file, I could easily go to the properties again and then go to security. I can easily add someone else. Yeah. So for example, I will close this, and let me just right click, go to manage. And here I have the local users and group under the computer management, or underneath computer management local. And I have lists of users and lists of groups. Yeah. So let's say I will go and create a new user called, let's say, my son's name, for example, Arvin. Full name is Arvin Yulianto. Just an example. Yeah, you can put any password that you would like. Okay, and you can select user must change password, or yeah, you can untick or remove the option. I mean the selection. Yeah, so I'll just leave like this and create, right? So I have created Arvin, yeah, as the new user, yeah, and I can easily assign the permission to my son, which is by editing this and selecting Arvin.Yulianto. And I can tell my OS that I'm actually sorry, I think I'll need to show you my screen. Yeah, sorry. Let me repeat again. Yeah. So after adding the, yeah, here, can you see? Yeah. So for example, here, I will repeat process. So I'll just go to my PC, manage, and then after that, I will add my son's name here. I've added Arvin, yeah, and then after adding Arvin, I can right click on my file, go to the property. Can you see my property? Okay. And then go to the security, and you can select edit and then add the newly created user. So let's say Arvin.Yulianto. And click check names. And you can only allow them to have like read and execute and read. Yeah. So that's Then you can easily review this by selecting advanced permission. Yeah. Can you see my advanced permission? Okay. And I can see that Arvin has been added as the allowed user or authorized user to access my test file. Okay. That's how I add the user. So what I was showing you the one I did was actually related to DAC or discretionary access control, right? And for the role-based, what you need to do is you will need to create a group. Yeah, for example, I will create a group. Yeah. Okay, so I will create a group. And here, what I will do is I will go to the local users and groups. I'll create a group. By default, we have several groups. These are the built-in or pre-configured group by Windows. What you can do is you can right-click here in the group or here. You can just select new group. I will just put like a VPN users. And as the members, I will add me, myself, for example, Sammy, as well as the, the object name, Sammy, let me see if I can add this. Yes. And then I will add my son's name or my other user, Arvin. Okay, so I'm adding Arvin and create the group. Yeah, I'll put something like a VPN user. So VPN users group. Yeah, authorized to access VPN. So something like that. So I will create a group. Yeah. And then when I assign permission, notice that I have just created VPN user groups and I have added me, myself, and my son. Yeah. So for example, 2 users, you can add as many users as you like. Then when you assign permission, you will need to add, you can easily add the permission by, for example, here, I can put my, this test file, just an example, by adding the group. Yeah, so instead of using Arvin, I will just remove this. Yeah, you can remove this if you want. Yeah, instead of removing this and me, myself, I could easily add the group, yeah, VPN users. And then I can assign permission for read and execute and read. So the one I did earlier was actually related to the role-based access control, where you use the group to make it easier for you to control the access to a specific object. Okay. Okay. So. Can you see my presentation slides? Okay, good. So let's move on to physical access control. By the way, we have 2 different category of access control. The first one is the physical access control, where you can actually provide the access control based on a specific device or devices. Okay. So many organizations cannot just rely solely on software-based access control. So they might, need to access a specific device or devices based on uh, token or by authenticating the device itself. Yeah, and authentication device, like for example, when you want to connect to a VPN, or maybe when you need to access your Wi-Fi, you will need to have the physical access control device or devices. Some examples related to the token, yeah, that are commonly used, yeah, to provide the authentication is the smart cards and proximity cards. And authenticating device example could be like, a card reader as shown in the screen here. We have the examples of the card reader used by, many organizations, many individuals to allow access to their, for example, VPN. Yeah. And some authenticating device work with other factors such as biometric. Think about having your phone with biometric authentication, yeah, to that also allows you to authenticate to other type of devices such as VPN access. Okay, then there are some biometric devices. You should know this one. You should be familiar with the fingerprint scanners, voice recognition devices, retinal scanner that is actually, scan the blood vessel in retina portion of the eye. The iris scanner scans the entire iris of a person's eye. Then facial recognition devices. Yeah, some of these are built in to your mobile phone, for example, or even your laptop. Yeah, and you can also use something called certificate-based authentication, the digital certificate that proves identity of the public key owner. Yeah, personal identity verification for the standard known as the Federal Standard for Temporary System and Authentication, providing card that use digital certificate. So remember that digital certificate normally are being used to prove the identity to the or as the owner. Yeah. So used by civilians, federal employees, and contractors, used to access facilities in the system. You can even have something called access card, common access card. Yeah. Personal identity verification like smart card for DoD, Department of Defense personnel, that provides certificate-based authentication. Yeah, so you can have something like this that will allow you to be authenticated based on your access card. Yeah. And how about the file system and database access? Access control for file systems depends on type and the operating system. Sometimes they will, they have this discretionary access control. Sometimes they also use something else like the Active Directory on Windows, which maintains ACL of what subject can access an object. So Active Directory in Windows is a very special systems that allows the structured organization of your object, which can be anything. Yeah, file, printer, computer, laptop, and so on. Yeah, and you can set granular permission. Granular means very detailed permission from the upper level to the lower level. Yeah, from the big one to the small one. Yeah. And database access control also depends on the software implementation. Like some of the databases elements implement something called a table, and access controls are based on commands like updating, modifying, creating the elements. Yeah, I'm recording the presentation. Yeah. yes, you may record presentation if you like, but it's best to actually get it from me because I will have the complete presentation. Yeah, so it's up to you. Yeah, you're allowed to do to record your presentation, my presentation. Okay. Now, so there are some guidelines for the recap for implementing the Identity and Access Management, or IAM. So consider adding the Identity and Access Management to the overall security management process, and you need to make yourself familiar with access control, different types of access control from MAC, DAC, RBAC, and so on and so forth. And you can decide the model, depends on your business and the environment. And you can also implement physical access control devices that will allow you to provide the authentication to your personal, like, for example, smart cards. And of course, if you're using biometric devices, it depends on the sensitivity of the biometric devices, as well as their strength and weaknesses. And the only problem with the biometric devices is that they are quite expensive. Yeah. So many organizations do not intend to actually use biometric devices depending on the budget. Yeah. And you can also look at some of the implementation of the file system level, for example, on Windows and on Linux. Okay. Okay. Now, I've already shown you how to provide access, so I'll skip this activity. Let me move on to Active Directory, Directory Services. Yeah, Directory Services is a network service that stores identity information about all objects in a particular network. And in Directory Services, object can include anything like users, groups, servers, client, printers, network services. So by utilizing directory services such as Active Directory on Windows, you can easily centralize security for controlling access to your network resources. And structure is based on hierarchy of the object, or maybe based on the department, and start with the root and branches out to other objects. That helps categorize objects in a network. So this is just an example of the Active Directory or Directory Services implementation. We start with the company name, like Developtech, and we have we can create two different OU, or organizational unit, called US and EU. So US and EU represent OUs, or organizational unit. And then we have the departments, so you can create different OUs or organizational units underneath US and EU, called, let's say, sales, marketing, and then EU we have R&D and IT. And underneath those departments, you can also create other types of OUs. Objects such as users, like John, Mary are users, and CRM servers, or server is the computer. Yeah. So you can easily add any objects underneath a specific OU or OUs. Yeah. So that's how we use the Active Directory services. Yeah. And then you can use the LDAP, the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, to run over TCP network. That will allow you to, manage your directory services by using LDAP clients. Yeah, that will allow you to also authenticate to the LDAP service. Yeah. And we normally use schema that defines the task, the form, and how directory server will respond. So you can actually use the LDAP protocol, or Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, on Windows as well as on Linux, right? And we can also implement the secure LDAP, which is the method of implementing LDAP using SSL and TLS encryption. Because by default, the lightweight directory access protocol, or LDAP, does not actually protect the communication. Everything is in a clear text. Yeah, so you can actually take advantage of the SLDAP or secure LDAP to secure the communication between client and server to server. Yeah, and of course the secure LDAP here requires you to implement the digital signature as well as the certificate. Yeah. And there are many other common directory services available, like we have the Active Directory, yeah, directory service by Microsoft. And then we have Oracle Directory Server, Enterprise Edition, ODC. And then we have the OpenDJ, open source cross-platform directory service written in Java, OpenLDAP, open source cross-platform LDAP implementation, usually available on Linux distros, and Open Directory, which is the implementation of the Open LDAP by Apple. Yeah. So we will not do this activity since we do not have the Active Directory. So maybe next time I'll show you on how to set up Active Directory. Yeah. And then how about remote access methods? Yeah. Now, you know that the organization normally provide users with the methods to do their work remotely, or we just call it as the remote access method. Yeah. So you can use like VPN, or maybe by utilizing browsers. Yeah. So customers and employees can remotely access the network resources. The gateway of the remote access server can provide access control to all or part of the network. And you can actually have an intermediate network like the internet that can also provide remote access, like for example, the implementation of the VPN or virtual private network. And security personnel must secure transmission that pass over a public network. Of course, if you want to provide the access to your employees, then you need to consider implementing the secure remote access. Yeah. Yeah, so you can actually start by implementing this tunneling protocol. Yeah, data transfer technique in which a data packet is encrypted and encapsulated in another data packet. Yeah, so tunneling is normally used to conceal or to hide the information of the inside packet, and normally hide user encrypted data from the carrier network. Yeah, and used in remote access protocols such as the VPN or virtual private network. Yeah, so you can see the graphic view of how the tunneling actually presented. So we have the carrier protocol, we have the encapsulating packet, as well as the original packet that is actually fully encrypted. Yeah. We normally take advantage of the encryption to fully encrypt user data. Yeah. There are many different types of remote access protocols available, like PPP, the PPP, yeah, point-to-point tunneling protocol, very old one, legacy standard. And then we have the PPTP, point-to-point tunneling protocol. Microsoft's VPN Layer 2 protocol provide encryption. We have the one of the latest one is the L2TP Layer 2 tunneling protocol. Is a combination of the PPTP and Layer 2 for tunneling PPP across network protocol. Designed for client to gateway and gateway to gateway secure connection. You can also use this with your routers. Yeah, PPP, PPTP, L2TP can be used on your network devices, as well as the SSTP, which uses SSL and TLS to encapsulate packet with PPP header and then SSTP header. Yeah. Now, another type of authentication is the HMAC-based one-time password. Yeah. So this is an algorithm that generates one-time password using hash-based message authentication code to ensure authenticity. So HMAC stands for the hash-based message authentication. Yeah. So it actually generates one-time password that can only be used once. Yeah. Like for example, the Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator that provides the OTP for one session only. Yeah. So it's actually valid for one session only. And we have been seeing this in many different implementation of the, secure application on your Android, iOS, as well as computer-based or web-based application. Yeah. So they also have what they call as the time-based OTP, which adds to the HOTP, the hardware OTP, by introducing time-based factor to the OTP authentication. Yeah, so HOTP is only invalidated after use to successfully authenticate, and addresses this TOTP or the time-based OTP addresses this flow by invalidating the password after a time. So after a specific time, it will automatically, be invalid. An attacker must steal password within the time period, and difficult to carry out attack this quickly because you have a very limited time. Yeah. So every time the OTP will change. Yeah. And how about the password authentication protocol? Password authentication protocol is the authentication protocol that sends user ID and password as the plain text, and usually used also in network or on many networking devices. Typically used when remote client is connecting to a non-Windows server like Unix and Linux based, right? So server here will receive ID, user ID and password, then compares it to the list of credential. Yeah. And then we also have Challenge-Handshake authentication protocol, or known as the CHAP, encrypted authentication protocol used to provide access control to remote access. It can also be used on a router or non-Windows host or non-Windows server, and uses MD5 hashing and challenge response mechanism. And the weakness of this particular CHAP is the MD5. Yeah. Very weak. Yeah. It's considered to be obsolete. And we also have something called LAN Manager, a challenge response authentication protocol created by Microsoft, and it was actually first released in early version of Windows NT. Yeah, still available, but no longer, I would say, used as the default authentication. Yeah, this is also called the NTLM, LAN Manager. Yeah, discouraged by Microsoft, and they also take advantage of the Kerberos, which is used by the Active Directory. Yeah. And how about the AAA? What does it mean by AAA? AAA means the authentication, or stands for the authentication, authorization, and accounting, which is the security concept for a centralized platform that perform three separate identity-based tasks, which is the authentication, verifying object identification, authorization, meaning that the object should be ensured to be assigned relevant permission. So we normally authorize a person to access a particular object or objects. That's why we have the ACL, access control list. And then we have the logging action to create the audit trail, known as the accounting. Yeah. So normally accounting is to provide the, I would say the accounting is actually, I would say the examples of the detective security control that provide the audit trails for any activities. Yeah. And AAA solutions are the gatekeepers that provide access to network services. So you can actually use Active Directory, directory services, radius authentication, TACAX authentication, yeah, that provide AAA. Just think about AAA as the centralized authentication for your VPN, your Wi-Fi, or your LAN. Yeah, so this is the one I mentioned, the Radius, which is stands for the Remote Authentication Dial-In User Service, the Internet Standard Protocol that provide AAA, and we also have the Network Access Server. This is a general term for remote access server used in Radius. Yeah, so Radius is just a AAA service which provide the authentication, authorization, and accounting for users based on configuration, user configuration, remote access policies, and user logon credential. Yeah. So this is just an example of the Radius or remote authentication dial-in, where you have the remote clients that connects to the access server, and an access server configured as Radius clients will authenticate with other Radius server that accept process for all authentication requests. So we have the three different components here in Radius. So we have the Radius client in the middle, the Radius server on the right side, and then remote client, basically the clients, anything like a laptop, VPN users that connects to Radius client. So Radius client will do the authentication with the Radius server, and all authentication requests will be provided by the Radius server. Yeah. And TACACS, this is the one I mentioned. TACACS stands for the Terminal Access Controller Access Control System. They also have the new implementation of TACACS called TACACS Plus, which provide a AAA service or services for the remote access, just like Radius. Yeah. And normally TACACS and XTACACS superseded the TACACS Plus, which are normally used for the non-Windows system, yeah, Linux, as well as Unix, then Cisco routers and different type of networking devices. Now, the default authentication on Windows system known as the Kerberos, yeah, which is the authentication service based on a time-sensitive ticket granting system. Yeah, it was actually developed by MIT to use a single sign-on methods. And the modern standards improve the NTLM and other protocols. So on many of the latest Windows operating system, Microsoft has implemented Kerberos as the default authentication protocol for Active Directory and non-Active Directory, host. Yeah. So this is how Kerberos actually works. You can see that we have the domain controller. Normally, domain controller is also the the server that provides the ticket. Yeah, this is called ticket granting server and ticket service. Yeah, so the domain controller is acting as the ticket granting ticket service, or they provide it actually provides the ticket granting service. And when the user logs onto the domain, user will request the TGT, the ticket granting ticket. And then the domain controller here will authenticate, as the authentication server will respond with a time-stamped TGT, ticket granting ticket, and then user requests service ticket to resource. And the authentication server here, by default, is the domain controller, will respond with the service ticket. And then finally, user will present service ticket to resource, and then resource will authenticate users based on the ticket. Think about a ticket that you bought from in a cinema, in a movie house. Then once you bought the ticket, you can actually go to any, a specific theater, predefined theater based on your ticket. And you can, of course, watch the movie on that particular predefined theater. Okay, you can try to do this activity like configuring remote access server, but you will need to have the at least Windows Server operating system like Windows 2008, Windows 2012, 2012, as well as the later version of Windows Server like Windows 2016 and 2019. Yeah, and then you can configure things like how remote access server can be set up. Quite a long for this activity. It's gonna be a quite a long process. So maybe I will do the next time I will do the video about how to configure remote access server by using Windows Server operating system. Yeah, so we'll see that one. Yeah. Also this one, the Radius, because it's quite complicated to actually do the setup. Yeah, not really complicated, I would say. No, yeah, intermediate. Yeah, yeah. So that's about the setup. Yeah. So remember that we use Radius or TACACS to provide AAA services: authentication, authorization, and auditing service, accounting service. And then let's have a look at the account management, which is the process, functions, and policies used to effectively manage user accounts in the organization. And this is a specific identity and access management function, which allows you to, which allows the administrator to create, update, modify, delete accounts tied to the identities. And user account normally are given to a specific user as the subject to allow or deny access to information system and resources. So imagine if you have a new joiner or a new perhaps employee, then the IT will need to provide this guy, the newly recruited guy, the account. Yeah, so you will need to provide him or her with, let's say, an identity, then finally create the accounts. So account is actually represents the identity. So for example, when you create an account called, for example, me, when I created the account called semi.yulianto, that account is my identity. And later on, that particular account will be used as the identity to provide, and the system will provide the authorization to access specific resources. Yeah. So with proper controls in place, organization can manage accounts. Yeah. So administrator or system admin will normally do this job. Yeah. And privileges, account privileges. Each user accounts is provided with permissions. Yeah, they have permission to access files and services, as well as to do job function or task. Yeah, you can also have a group base that is assigned for user. Yeah, like for example, the one I mentioned, by utilizing the role-based access control, you can actually create a specific group for a particular department, so that when you assign permission, you don't have to assign permission to each and individual users. Instead, you use the group. Yeah. And user with unique privilege or privileges and who is also a member of a group will have both set of permission. So for example, like if a user has a permission to access a folder or a file, yeah, let's say file A, and when you assign the permission to the group to be authorized to access, let's say, file A earlier, you will have, the user will have a combination of privileges that are assigned to him or her as the user or individual, as well as the group. And both should be well documented in a policy. Yeah. And we have several account types, such as the user accounts. This is a standard user type of general use, for general use. And then we have privileged accounts, such as, for example, VPN users, IT personnel, or maybe admins. It has, or they will have, greater access right than the standard user account. And then we have guest account, and normally used to sign in to public users or kiosk. Yeah. And then we have the computer and service account, which are normally used to access a computer or services such as starting and stopping SQL service, starting and stopping, let's say, a DNS service. No human entities also need the account. Yeah, so computer accounts is a very specific account. Yeah, computer or service account will be very specific. Yeah. Is not actually, they are not actually dealing with as the user, but they are used to access or initiate services. Yeah, and represent computer as well. Yeah. And then we have the account policy, a document that includes the organization's requirement for account creation, monitoring, and removal, and can also include specific user or group-based requirements. And the policy statements would be like account approval, resource usage, shared or multiple account usage, disablement, modification, expiration, prohibition, password usage, lockout, and recovery. Yeah, let me just show you an example. Yeah, of this one. Yeah, just give me a minute. So I'm accessing my computer management. Yeah, so this is my computer management. Yeah, so let me show you my screen. Here you can find the default groups created by Windows, and underneath this, wait, let me just check where should I actually find. Yeah, this is actually for the users and group, but for the policies, I will need to run MMC. That will allow me to, yeah. So I run the MMC, and here I can easily add and remove step in. I will use the group policy and local computer and click OK. And from here, you can double click to look at the computer configuration as well as user configuration. Double click to expand. You can go to the Windows settings and security settings and the account policies. Remember the account policies that I was actually talking about earlier. So here you can specify the password policy, whatever password you have, account lockout policy. Then you can even have other types of policies like audit policy, user right assignment, and security options. Yeah, all are, for all of these can be configured on your Windows system. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. Yeah, so this is the one I mentioned. Password length, password complexity can be set, history, reuse, and you can even have multiple accounts. Yeah, like for example, a user can have several accounts on the same system. Like for example, as the admin, I can create my other account that will be used or which is actually used to do some daily activities. So imagine let's say on your laptop you can actually create two different accounts. One is the admin and one is you yourself. Yeah, for example, here I'm using semi.yulianto. So when I log on to my laptop or my PC to do my daily jobs or daily tasks, then I will use my semi.yulianto as the account. I will log on using that account. But when I'm going to actually do some of the administrative tasks, such as creating new account or maybe doing things that requires a high privilege, what do you call this, or high privileges, then I will use my admin account. Yeah. So one user can have like normal standard user account as well as the admin account. Yeah. So depending on the task that this user will actually do. And we also have the shared account accessed by accessed by more than one users or resource, like for example, guest or generic accounts, temporary contractor accounts that we just put as, let's say, contractors, or user one contractor, or user one for the backup admins, or batch process accounts is also an example of the shared accounts. And it is actually quite risky because it's very difficult to get the accountability, because everyone is using the same account. It is actually not recommended, but sometimes it is actually be utilized by many organizations. Because users may become careless. Someone can just delete a particular transaction, and the other one can just add a transaction, and all they see is one single account that was actually doing those mistakes. And for the security control, we have several things to keep in mind. Like, for example, standards naming convention. For example, use the naming accounts consistently by, for example, first name dot last name, add the domain name. And then account maintenance, like how do you modify or remove accounts when a particular user or employee left the organization. Do you need to disable the account first, or quickly delete the account? It depends on the policy. Onboarding, offboarding is also related to the new accounts being used. Like you can create new accounts, or when you terminate the employee, you might just remove the account, or maybe just disable the account temporarily. Maybe because you want to do some investigation prior to the offboarding. Then we have the access recertification, which is normally perform regular permission audit to uphold least privilege. Usage auditing, which is normally used to spot malicious behavior. Group-based access control, which is easier for the management. Location-based policy, which restrict physical and virtual location from which user gain access, as well as the time of the restriction. For example, they can only connect to the server during off-peak hours to avoid detection, or maybe specific day and time only allows, let's say, user to access a server or resources from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. From Monday to Friday. So that would be related to time of the day restriction. And credential management. Credential management is the tool or the process of storing, organizing account credential. And the tool is normally called Credential Manager, which is used to stores and organize account credential. So credential management, such as, for example, KeyPass or KeepPass, or you can use something called, let's say, LastPass, which is free, stores credential in encrypted database, and you can easily retrieve this credential when needed. So, for example, here you can use the LastPass. Let me show you my screen. So you can use a LastPass. So this is the password manager or credential management tool. You can use this KeepPass. KeepPass. Here, password safe. Maybe like Dashlane, something like this. Password manager, as well as password boss. Yeah, password boss, password manager. So you can use any of these from the LastPass, KeePass. KeePass, by the way, is a tool that can be installed on your Windows, while the rest are utilizing your browser, the extension. Yeah. So you can use this LastPass, Dashlane, Password Boss, and KeePass. Yeah. And for the identity and access management, you can use the tool called, I forgot the name of the tool. Let me recall the tool. Anyone knows about the password management, identity and access management tool? Yeah, I forgot. I know, remember. Okta. Yeah, Okta. Okta is a very good identity and access management. But the problem with the Okta is that Okta is actually quite expensive. Yeah. And there's another one called SailPoint. This is also related to identity and access management. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's get back to our presentation. So basically, you can use credential management tool to store and organize your accounts, credential, as well as your passwords. Yeah. All will be stored in an encrypted format. Yeah. Okay, then the group policy. Group policy by default is being used on Windows domain. Is a method for it provides method for managing accounts security across a Windows domain, like enforcing password length, account lockout, storing account password, enforcing Kerberos logon, auditing account, and assigning specific rights. So the group policy management is included on every Windows operating system. Yeah. We're talking about the latest version, starting from Windows 7. They have this. Windows XP actually already has this group policy. Yeah. So until today, Microsoft are still they are still maintaining the group policy. Yeah. And then we have the identity federation or federated identity, the practice of linking a single entity across multiple disparate identity management system. Yeah, think about using the SSO, single sign-on. Yeah, and the identity federation encompasses all policies and protocols. Like for example, Microsoft, you can use Microsoft account to access Windows 10, OneDrive, Xbox Live, or even Outlook, or maybe like your Gmail account can be used to access any Google related services. Yeah. And for the methods, we have the SAML, we have the OpenID, we have the OAuth and Shibboleth. SAML is the XML-based framework for exchanging security-related info. And this is the, I would say, the standard for the identity federation method. And then we have the OpenID, the authentication method for participating site. Yeah, Google's and Amazon's are utilizing this OpenID. We also have the OAuth, similar to OpenID, but provide authorization instead of the authentication. And sites like Google, Twitter, and Facebook are utilizing OAuth. And then the latest one is the Shibboleth, based on SAML and often used by universities or public service organization. And the authentication is sent through URL queries. Now, before we are done with this presentation, let me show you the, this one. This is like a summary of the federated identity. I made this quite a long time ago. It actually explains the SAML, yeah, security assertion markup language, yeah, with the diagram, yeah. And here we have the principal, typically the user. So this is the user, Michelangelo, for example. And we have the identity service provider, which can be the Facebook, for example, and a service provider, which can be any domain, like, for example, your own domain. Yeah. So we have at least 3 different roles: the principal, which is the user; the identity provider; the IDP, which is, let's say, Facebook or LinkedIn; and a service provider, which actually the identity looking to use the identity provider. Yeah. Yeah, KeePass and LastPass also open source. By the way, LastPass is not open source. They provide free version, but in fact, LastPass is commercial product. Yeah. Okay, so I also have the OpenID, the diagram relies on 3 different roles: end user, relying party, and ID provider. And the OAuth version 2, which is the open standard, and it has the following roles: end user, resource server, known as the OAuth provider, and the client OAuth customer. Yeah. And I also have the Shibboleth Internet 2 middleware initiative. It has the IDP, identity provider, service provider, and discovery services. Okay. And then lastly, I have the comparison summary about the SAML, OpenID, OAuth, and Shibboleth. Okay. So I will share this document in our Telegram group, and to make it easier for you to understand the concept. Yep. And okay, so we're done with the identity federation methods and some guidelines for managing accounts. Uphold the principle of least privilege and draft account policy and include all necessary requirements. And then you can use the what do you call this, policy that will allow you to set up the strong password requirements. Also, don't forget to enable auditing and usage restriction. And try not to actually use the or even limit the use of multiple shared accounts, because they are vulnerable to different types of misuse. And implement account management control like auditing and usage restriction. And for the identity federation system, you can choose whether you want to use the OpenID, OAuth, and so on, as well as implementing or utilizing the credential management system that will allow you to, what do you call this, easily memorize or easily, capture your credentials. Okay, so we'll skip the activity, nothing much, and that's a respective question. Yeah, so let me turn on the, yeah, so that's actually the end of our lesson. If you have any question, please. Yeah, just let's do the discussion in Telegram. So,
sir,
yes,
wanna ask you.
yes.
Wanna ask, what is the Telegram group?
Sorry. Yeah. Can you just talk? Enable your mic. Let's see.
What is the Telegram group? I wanna join it because I'm not
Okay.
open yet.
Okay. The Telegram group. Let me just.
Please show me the name of the group.
Name of the group is the IDP. Let me run my Telegram group first. Yeah, just give me a minute. This is our Telegram group, and let me see. let me manage the group and invite link, and then I'll copy this.
Okay, sir.
You got it?
Thank you very much.
Okay, this is the link. All right.
Okay.
Okay, so that's all for today's session, and see you in our next session. Thank you. Good evening.